For years, I believed my life had finally reached that quiet equilibrium people spend their whole existence chasing. The kind that isn't loud or triumphant, just steady. Predictable. I'd wake before dawn, shower, grab the same coffee mug Lauren always left ready on the counter, and drive 20 minutes to the construction office on East Riverside. The air always smelled of dust, diesel, and the faint sweetness of concrete dust baking under the Texas sun. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, a career I had built from the ground up, brick by brick, project by project. My promotion to senior project manager had come only 6 months earlier, after 15 years of clawing through deadlines, weather delays, and endless negotiations with clients who thought blueprints were abstract art. The new title came with respect, a pay bump, and an entire team answering to me. I didn't think of it as success, just stability. Lauren said she was proud. I wanted to believe her. She was everything my life had lacked before her, composed, graceful, and sharp in ways that could cut through any man's defenses. I met her 6 years ago when she worked as a logistics coordinator for another firm. She had a teenage son, Ryan, from a previous marriage, and a quiet sadness she never talked about. We fit together the way mismatched puzzle pieces sometimes do, imperfectly, but convincingly enough. For a while, I thought we were happy. Then the small things began to change. It started with the phone always face down. The late nights she justified as helping with paperwork for a friend's business. The way she'd go silent when I walked into a room mid-call. I told myself it was stress. Everyone had their private spaces. And yet, something about the pauses between her words, that measured tone she adopted when she lied, began to feel familiar. Around that same time, things at work began to drift off course. The first red flag came from Gary, one of my senior accountants. He called me into his office one afternoon, closing the door behind him like a man stepping into confession. "You know about the West Creek redevelopment invoices?" he asked. I told him I'd signed off on all the approved ones last week. He turned his monitor toward me. My signature glowed in the corner of 3 purchase orders I had never seen. For a few seconds, I didn't say a word. My name was there, the same precise angle of my pen stroke, the same digital timestamp from our secure sign-in system. Only, I had been at a city inspection that day, 2 hours away. Could it be a system error? I asked. Gary hesitated. "It's possible. But it's strange, the login came from your home IP." That night, I brought it up to Lauren. She was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, the sound of the knife steady and quick. I told her someone had used our internet connection to access company files. She didn't look up, didn't even pause the rhythm of her hands. "Probably Ryan downloading something again," she said. "He uses the VPN for school. You know how that stuff messes with addresses." I nodded, though the explanation sat in me like a stone that refused to settle. 2 days later, another file appeared, a subcontractor invoice dated and signed by me, but for an equipment vendor I'd never authorized. The total was nearly $68,000. The payment had cleared the same morning. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not panic, not fear, just the awareness that a quiet storm was forming somewhere behind the ordinary surface of my life. The next week, I stayed late at the office, combing through project files long after the cleaning crew had left. It was close to midnight when I found the first pattern. All the suspicious documents had been approved through a secondary system account linked to mine, one that could only have been created with admin credentials. Someone wasn't just forging my signature. They had built a shadow version of me. I changed my passwords that night. I told Gary to back up every audit log, every trace of digital access, and keep them offline. I didn't sleep. I didn't even go home. By morning, I convinced myself this was fixable, a breach, a hacker, something technical and impersonal. That illusion lasted until Friday. When I finally returned home, Lauren was in the living room with Vincent Hale. I knew him immediately. He was a developer, smooth-talking, always dressed too well for construction meetings. He'd tried to partner with my company a year earlier, offering strategic support that reeked of political connections and bribes. I had turned him down. Now, he was sitting on my couch, sipping coffee from one of our mugs. Lauren smiled, as if the sight of them together wasn't jarring. "Vincent's consulting on a new commercial lot," she said casually. "He just needed my input on logistics. You remember him from the conference, don't you?" I remembered. He stood, shook my hand, and thanked me for the warm hospitality. His palm was dry, firm, and lingering, the kind of handshake that carries hidden intent. When he left, I asked Lauren since when she'd been consulting. "Just helping him get permits sorted," she said, already turning away. "It's nothing serious. Don't overthink it." But I did. That night, when she fell asleep beside me, I got up quietly and went to my home office. The unmarked flash drive I'd noticed earlier in the week still sat near the printer. Out of idle suspicion, I plugged it in. Inside were copies of contract PDFs from my work drive, not just mine, but restricted documents from other departments. The file names were labeled with project codes that only internal management knew. And the metadata of every file included one recurring user tag, lturner_ACC access. Lauren's login. I sat there for a long time, staring at the monitor, the soft glow of the screen casting my hands in a pale blue light. For the first time, I noticed how quiet the house felt, not peaceful quiet, but the hollow kind that lives in spaces where trust has started to die. The next morning, I went through the motions, kissed her cheek, drove to work, attended meetings, answered emails, all while the weight of what I'd seen pressed against me like a secret I wasn't ready to own. I tried to convince myself there was an explanation. Maybe she'd logged into my system for something routine. Maybe Vincent's consulting involved shared files. Maybe I was tired, paranoid, overworked. But the mind knows when truth has already arrived. It doesn't knock. It just sits there, uninvited, waiting for acknowledgement. That weekend, I went through every drawer in the house, not looking for evidence, just for reassurance that the woman I trusted hadn't become a stranger. In the bottom of her desk, beneath old receipts and perfume samples, I found a small white envelope. Inside was a prepaid debit card and a folded sheet of paper with numbers, routing codes, account names, and one note written in her handwriting, VH transfer, Phase 2 approved. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't quicken. There was only a strange stillness, the kind that follows realization too heavy for emotion. I sat down at her desk, listening to the clock tick. Outside, the Texas evening was sinking into its usual amber light. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower droned, and Ryan was playing his music too loud upstairs. The world was still functioning exactly as it always had, and yet, mine had shifted permanently. In that moment, I understood something simple and unromantic about betrayal: it never begins with the act itself. It starts quietly, in moments disguised as normal days, in the way someone stops looking at you directly, in the way silence replaces conversation, in the way trust dissolves molecule by molecule until the shape of your life no longer fits. The flash drive was still in my pocket. I looked at it once more before locking it in my desk drawer. By Monday, I decided to pretend nothing had changed. Not yet. Let the storm build a little longer. The following week, the office atmosphere changed, not in any visible way, but in the small, uneasy silences that follow you like shadows. When people spoke to me, they hesitated before mentioning the West Creek project. I'd catch the sideways glances during meetings, the muted conversations that stopped when I walked past. It was the kind of shift that didn't need words to announce itself. On Wednesday, my supervisor, Dan Reed, called me in. He looked tired, as if the conversation had been decided for him rather than by him. He didn't offer coffee, didn't bother with small talk. "There's been an internal review," he said. "Finance flagged several inconsistencies in project payments under your authorization. Until we get clarity, the board decided to suspend you with pay." I asked what inconsistencies. "Large transfers to vendors we can't trace. Signed off under your name." Repeatedly. He tried to sound understanding, but the distance in his voice gave him away. It was the tone of someone separating himself from a sinking ship. I didn't argue. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out, the whole office pretending to focus on their screens as I passed. In my car, I sat for a long time without starting the engine. I'd imagined humiliation would come with some grand emotion, anger, disbelief, something visible. Instead, it felt mechanical. I simply began taking mental notes, reconstructing the timeline. Lauren had access to my home system. Vincent had motive. I had both means and ignorance, the perfect scapegoat. That night, I went home early. The house smelled of white wine and something faintly metallic, like perfume with a synthetic edge. Lauren was at the dining table, laptop open, papers spread in neat rows. She looked up, surprised to see me. "You're home early. They suspended me." Her fingers froze above the keyboard. "What?" "For unauthorized payments. My name's on documents I never approved." Her expression shifted quickly, first shock, then the smallest flicker of calculation before she masked it with concern. "That's insane, Michael. You need to talk to HR, tell them someone hacked the system." I did. The access came from our home network. She swallowed, eyes darting toward the window. "You're saying I'm saying nothing yet," I interrupted quietly. "But I need your work laptop. For a few hours." Her jaw tightened. "That's my personal property. You don't get to accuse me and then take my computer." "I'm not accusing," I said. "I'm trying to stay out of prison." Her voice rose, brittle and sharp. "So now I'm your suspect?" I didn't answer. I went upstairs, took the flash drive, and slipped it into my pocket. When I came down, she was already gone, the front door still swinging slightly from the wind. That night, I drank alone for the first time in months. Not to forget, forgetting was impossible now, but to still the constant calculation happening in my mind. I wasn't angry. I was taking inventory of every variable, every weakness, every opportunity. Lauren's access. Vincent's motive. The stolen funds. It all aligned too neatly. The next morning, I met Gary at a diner 2 towns over. He'd been with the company 20 years, the kind of man who remembered everything but rarely said much. When I told him about the suspension, he nodded slowly and slid a folded paper across the table. "I thought this might happen," he said. I ran some numbers off the record. The document listed half a dozen wire transfers to a shell company, LH Logistics Partners LLC, with routing numbers linked to offshore accounts. Every payment was signed under my name, yet the approval timestamps always occurred between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. I hadn't logged in past midnight once that year. I asked him where the payments led. Cayman Intermediary, then to something called Hale Developments. Vincent. I left the diner with a clarity that felt heavier than fear. I finally understood the architecture of the setup. I was never meant to be caught stealing, just blamed when the trail was traced. When I got home, Lauren was gone again. Her closet was half empty. A note lay on the counter. "I need time to think. Don't contact me for a while. L." I didn't chase her. The moment demanded strategy, not emotion. Instead, I drove to a tech repair shop downtown and paid a kid to pull every fragment of deleted data from the flash drive. He didn't ask questions. When he handed it back, he said, "You've got emails here that look encrypted. Not basic stuff." Back in my rented storage unit, I set up an old laptop, disconnected from the internet, and began digging. The files were structured, professional, weekly expense reports, vendor agreements, permit drafts, all carrying my name. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became that whoever built this had access to the company's internal auditing codes. That narrowed the suspects down to 4 people, and Lauren wasn't one of them, at least not directly. But Vincent was. Still, she was connected. Her name surfaced in a set of hidden comment threads attached to those same files. The tone was transactional, efficient, stripped of emotion. VH, approval sequence confirmed. LT, ensure MT signs off this week. He's asking questions. VH, keep him distracted. We're close. My initials, their shorthand. Conversations happening behind my back about how to keep me docile while they completed whatever phase 2 was. By midnight, I'd pieced together the full picture. Vincent had leveraged Lauren to access my login credentials, using her proximity to install a parallel access route. She'd been paid through the Logistics Shell, a company that existed solely to move the stolen funds into offshore entities. It wasn't romantic betrayal, it was mechanical, calculated, clean. That somehow made it worse. The following morning, I called a lawyer. He listened patiently, but his tone was careful, the kind reserved for clients already halfway doomed. "Michael, these are serious accusations," he said. "Right now, there's only your word against the company's system logs. Until you can produce proof of tampering, we prepare for a defense, not an attack." Proof of tampering. That phrase followed me the rest of the day like a silent drumbeat. 2 nights later, I went to Vincent's new construction site on the city's north side. I waited in my car across from the trailer office until he came out, flanked by 2 men in suits. He looked relaxed, the way men look when they believe they control the board. When he spotted me, his expression flickered, not surprise, just annoyance, like I was an inconvenient reminder of unfinished business. He walked over, hands in pockets. "You shouldn't be here, Mike." I told him I wanted the truth. He smiled faintly. "Truth's an expensive habit. Most people can't afford it." I said nothing. He leaned in, voice lowering. "You were useful, you know. Trustworthy face. Clean record. You made things easier." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving the faint scent of cologne and asphalt dust behind him. It was all I needed, confirmation that he thought I was powerless. That night, I started my own investigation in earnest. I copied every relevant file I could find from backups, printed the metadata, and began cross-referencing timestamps, digital signatures, and invoice chains. Days bled into weeks. My suspension turned indefinite. The company stopped returning my emails. My lawyer grew quieter with every conversation. One evening, as I was sorting through a pile of printed documents, the phone rang. "Michael?" The voice was small, fragile. "Lauren." For a moment, I didn't answer. "I need to talk," she said. "Please." Her tone wasn't confident anymore. It was flat, nervous. She asked to meet in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small park near the river. She looked different, thinner, exhausted, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For the first time, she seemed unsure of her own story. "They're threatening me," she said. "Vincent, his people, I thought it was just money transfers, but they're—" I cut her off. "You stole from my company. You framed me." "I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered. "He said it was temporary, just until the deal cleared. Then everything got out of control." I watched her carefully. The remorse sounded real, but remorse was just another currency in her world, something spent when survival required it. She reached into her purse, handed me a small notebook filled with transaction codes. "These are his offshore accounts. You can prove it was him. Please, fix this before it's too late." Before I could respond, she was already walking away, shoulders trembling but head high, the same composure that had once drawn me to her now masking whatever conscience she had left. I stood there for a long time, holding the notebook under the streetlight. The pages were full of numbers, dates, wire codes, payment amounts, but all I could see was the neat, practiced handwriting of a woman who had once promised honesty. I didn't feel hatred. Just finality. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the notebook in a metal box with the flash drive and every printout I had gathered. The picture was complete now. They had built their empire on the assumption that I would break quietly. They were wrong. The storm had stopped feeling like punishment. Now, it felt like strategy. The first months after Lauren left passed in fragments, too quiet to feel like living, too heavy to call surviving. I rented a small apartment above an auto repair shop on the outskirts of Austin. The walls smelled faintly of oil and burnt rubber, and the windows rattled when trucks passed. I liked the noise, it covered the silence. Days blurred together, long hours combing through files, drinking cheap coffee, feeding on the dull rhythm of investigation. What I lacked in certainty, I replaced with persistence. The notebook Lauren had given me became my scripture. Every number, date, and transaction pointed toward Vincent's web, layers of shell companies, each feeding another like parasites consuming themselves. The more I traced, the clearer his arrogance appeared. He didn't hide the fraud. He disguised it through complexity, trusting that confusion was the best defense. I wasn't confused anymore. I contacted an old acquaintance, Lydia Chen, a forensic accountant who had left the corporate world to work privately. We met in a diner, neutral ground. I showed her the files. She didn't ask why I had them. She only said, "This could bury him, if you can prove authenticity." For that, I needed someone who could amplify the evidence. Through Lydia, I found a journalist, Sam Becker, a man whose writing had once made developers like Vincent flinch. He was skeptical at first, assuming I was just another bitter ex-employee chasing revenge. But when I laid out the evidence, the forged invoices, the account transfers, the email threads, he stopped taking notes and started listening. "This is federal," he said finally. "If this checks out, it's not just a scandal. It's prison time." He agreed to verify everything, discreetly. In return, I promised anonymity until the investigation broke. From then on, everything I did was calculated. No impulsive moves, no emotional slips. I knew Vincent's type, men who mistake quiet for weakness. While Sam gathered corroboration, Lydia traced missing funds. The web widened, not just Vincent, but city inspectors, zoning officers, even 2 council members. It was a network of corruption hidden under legitimate progress. Weeks passed before the first tremor reached the surface. A leaked article appeared online, unsigned, speculative, but precise enough to rattle nerves. It mentioned a mid-level executive falsely accused of embezzlement while higher powers escaped scrutiny. It never named me, but everyone in that circle knew. Vincent called that same night. I hadn't heard his voice since the confrontation outside his site. "You're making a mistake, Mike," he said. His voice carried no anger, just calm control. "You think exposing this will save you? You'll go down with us." I said nothing. He laughed softly. "That's your problem, you mistake silence for strength." Then he hung up. But his tone told me something important, he was nervous. 2 days later, Lydia called. One of his shell companies just dissolved overnight. He's moving assets offshore again. We worked faster. Sam was ready with documents, emails from city officials, receipts connecting Vincent's firm to council votes, and a bank trail leading straight to his personal accounts. Still, I kept my distance. I didn't want to be visible yet. Then, late one evening, Lauren called again. Her voice was thin, almost shaking. "They're watching me," she said. "Vincent's men. They think I talked." "You did," I said quietly. "I didn't do this for him," she said. "Or for you. I just want out." I told her to leave town for a few days. I wasn't protecting her, I was removing her from the board. That weekend, Sam's article went live, front page, full names, verified documents. It was surgical, methodical, impossible to refute. The story traced the fraud from Hale developments through City Hall and into offshore accounts under Vincent's control. By Monday, the fallout began. Hale's offices were raided. 2 council members resigned within hours. The federal task force moved faster than anyone expected. Vincent vanished for 3 days, then reappeared in handcuffs on the evening news. I watched it on a flickering television in my small apartment, a paper cup of cold coffee in my hand. The reporter's voice described years of systematic fraud under the guise of urban renewal. My name wasn't mentioned. That silence was its own kind of victory. Lauren resurfaced 2 weeks later through her lawyer, agreeing to testify in exchange for immunity. She provided the full digital trail linking Vincent's operation to internal systems, including her own role. Her confession sealed the case. When it was over, I expected to feel something: relief, vindication, even anger. But all I felt was the absence of noise. Lydia told me I could probably sue for defamation, reclaim my reputation, even get rehired. I declined. Some structures aren't worth rebuilding. Instead, I used what remained of my savings to start a small consulting business, nothing big, just oversight and project ethics for mid-sized firms. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean. Months passed quietly. The headlines moved on. Vincent Hale's trial became another story in a world already crowded with corruption. One morning, I received an envelope, no return address, postmarked from Houston. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note written in Lauren's hand. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I wanted to start paying back what I took from you, not the company. I didn't cash it. I burned it over the sink and watched the ashes scatter. Justice had already been served. Money wouldn't rewrite the past. That night, I went for a walk near the construction site that had once been West Creek. The buildings were finished now, new glass, clean sidewalks, people moving beneath bright streetlights. I stood across the street, unnoticed, watching something I had helped create survive everything that tried to destroy it. The wind picked up dust, carried it down the boulevard like faint memory. For the first time in a year, I felt peace, not the fragile kind that hides beneath routine, but the kind that comes when truth finally stops whispering. The city moved on faster than I expected. That's the strange thing about justice: it never feels like a victory, only a correction that comes too late to save what mattered. Vincent Hale was sentenced to 12 years. The news made a small splash, then disappeared under fresher scandals. Lauren testified twice, then vanished from the public record. I didn't follow her story. There was nothing left to find. I stayed out of sight. My consulting work grew slowly, almost deliberately so. A few small firms hired me to audit their project management systems, nothing more. I liked the simplicity: no boardrooms, no politics, no masks. Just work. Sometimes, when I drove past the old company's new headquarters, I'd see young managers walking in, coffee in hand, faces bright with the confidence I once had. I didn't envy them. They hadn't learned yet that integrity doesn't survive by accident, it has to be protected like a fragile species. Lydia and Sam remained the only people from that year I kept in touch with. She rebuilt her accounting firm, and he won an award for his exposé, though he never mentioned me by name. I preferred it that way. Recognition always carries a debt. Then, one afternoon, Lauren appeared again. It was late winter. My office was small: one window, a second-hand desk, the hum of a heater too old to be safe. She knocked once before opening the door. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, her posture smaller. The certainty that once defined her had evaporated. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. I gestured to the chair. She sat, eyes darting to the floor. The silence stretched between us, not hostile, just full of unspoken things that no apology could bridge. "I wanted to tell you," she said finally, "I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, for everything before that. For pretending I could live with it." I nodded. There was nothing to forgive, and nothing to take back. What existed between us had ended long before the first lie. She looked around my office, at the cracked walls and cluttered desk. "You're still building," she said softly. "Yes," I said. "Just smaller things now." She smiled faintly, the kind that flickers and dies before it reaches the eyes, and stood. "You were always better at starting over than I was." When she left, I didn't watch her go. The door closed quietly, and I realized I felt no anger, no nostalgia. Just stillness. That night, I drove to the edge of town where the West Creek development stood completed. The city lights reflected on the glass buildings, and for a moment I could see my own reflection staring back, older, sharper, but steady. I walked along the sidewalk, passing the storefronts that had replaced the ruins of my old life. Every structure here existed because of plans I had drawn years earlier, back when I believed hard work was enough to shield a man from corruption. It wasn't, but it taught me something better: that truth, like concrete, hardens slowly and permanently if you let it set in silence. A gust of wind carried dust across the street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint and directionless. The world was still turning, indifferent, alive, full of its own quiet storms waiting to form in other people's lives. For me, the storm had passed. I drove home under an orange sky, the kind that makes everything look slightly unreal. The city skyline shimmered behind me like a mirage I no longer needed to reach. In my apartment, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the lights flicker in the distance. What I'd lost had stripped me down to something solid. Not revenge, not even justice, just equilibrium. The kind of peace that doesn't disguise itself anymore.